Stay tuned to the end of this video for a It's like FGO Wanted, the show where we let you know if you want to roll that 5-star. And I hope everybody is having a super day today, because we're going to take a crack, tell a yarn about a super new alter ego today, Super Bunyan. She's Bunyan, but super. So we've got a new limited SSR alter ego we're going to be talking about. If this is your first time watching a Wanted video, structure's pretty simple. We're going to talk about real-life history and folklore. We're going to talk about their lore and fate. We're going to talk about their mechanics. And we're going to talk about some other stuff that you might want to know before rolling on a banner. So stay tuned through the whole thing. Also, for reasons that'll become clear later, I can unironically ask you to like, comment, and subscribe at the start of the video here and have it be part of the bit. That's actually, like, referential to what we're talking about. If you want to know why, and you don't know already, stay tuned. So, beginning at the real-life zone, Paul Bunyan is a classic American tall tale, originating in oral tradition among lumberjacks in the Great Lakes area. The shortest version, if you do not know already, is that Paul Bunyan is a giant lumberjack capable of numerous fancy feats. There are many of them out there, some of them somewhat consistent over time, but we'll be talking about that as we go. There's no exact agreed-upon origin for the name I can find. Most scholars I can source seem to have speculated or worked from a French-Canadian connection, but nothing solid. The earliest written use of Paul Bunyan that I could track down is from a newspaper of Gladwin County, Michigan. It appeared as a brief line in about 1893, but it's just a small insert, a brief reference or in-joke, like slipping a meme into a newspaper story now, assuming newspapers still exist when I post this video. Our more impactful mention comes several years later in an editorial from a paper in Duluth, Minnesota, dated 1904. So this editorial contains many of the elements of stories which are going to show up later. Reports the tall lumberjack Paul Bunyan working in North Dakota, dealing with an issue of blue snow, having a camp for giants that's so big, and then to feed everybody in the camp, including Paul Bunyan, having a stove so large that Bunyan skates on it with ham skates, skating on a stove. So some pretty large elements there, though no appearance of the blue ox yet. That element is added later. Also, in at least one case, I found somebody mentioned there might have been a pink ox. Cotton candy oxen, maybe. These stories would be retold and expanded over the next decade or so. We'd see new and old elements in various publications. Different stories and authors started adding little bits here and there. New stories that you may have heard of. The Lake of Pea Soup, the Blue Ox, as I mentioned, so on and so forth. This includes commentary on Bunyan's giant stature, the earliest reference to this I could find being, quote, 8 feet tall and weighed 300 pounds, unquote. But after some of this period of published expansion, Paul Bunyan was the subject of a scholarly work from the University of Wisconsin. Got published in a collection known as Legends of Paul Bunyan Lumberjack, which you can look up, in 1916. So, over the course of this decade or so where it started appearing in print, this eventually culminated in somebody going, hey, I recorded and written down some of these stories. Look at this. But Paul Bunyan lore also got kicked up a notch thanks to the power of capitalism. Also in 1916, there was an ad writer by the name of William B. Laughhead, or possibly Loudhead, but I'm going to say Laughhead because it's funnier. But he used Bunyan as a central character in a series of pamphlets and other advertisements for the Red River Lumber Company. Laughhead retold many previous elements of the stories, but also added his own super extra embellishments. This included Bunyan being impossibly tall, taller than trees, naming the Blue Ox Babe, and some anecdote you've probably heard of if you know of Paul Bunyan, him being responsible for creating many of America's great landmarks, such as Minnesota's 10,000 Lakes, the Grand Canyon, Mount Hood, etc. Laughhead was also the first person to visually depict Bunyan, kind of building his own vibes. By the way, I use Wikipedia as like our starter source here, like you should with an encyclopedia. I look at it, I check where the sources are. We sometimes drill down on some of those sources if we need to. We use that to run interference on some common knowledge stuff. In this area, when talking about the introduction of the ad campaign, there's a Wikipedia note that's completely unsourced but very funny. It talks about Paul meeting a redheaded giant wife named Sylvia, and they get married and have a daughter named Tiny. But again, literally, the little citation needed on it. So don't take that as lore. I just thought that it's just very funny. There's this very elaborate backstory for Paul being in a relationship and having a kid that's in there. Somebody might just be engaging in some progressive era American shipping. But, keep that one in mind for future reimaginings. Now, being used as an advertising mascot made Bunyan pretty entrenched in greater American culture. Basically went from a relatively obscure local legend in the Great Lakes area among, loggers and backwoodsmen to an actual, advertising icon. So that means that he's also been a recurring character in children's media, such as books and story collections, and also several animations, including, you guessed it, a Walt Disney short, first in 1958. By the way, fun fact, this short was nominated for an Academy Award, and Paul was voiced by the same voice actor as Tony the Tiger. Take that one in. There were also several other later Bunyan-focused Disney works as well. As usual, Disney doesn't like to let go of a character once they adaptify them. Now, funnily enough, I did find some notes that the excessive commercialization of Bunyan did lead to some scholars actually being skeptical if he was an original tall tale. They thought that Paul Bunyan might be folklore. Love that word. But as we noted earlier chronologically, there are actually some pre-advertising phase stories to use as a basis. There definitely was something up there, but while extreme, most of it was much more reasonable, much more graspable. Being 8 foot tall and 300 pounds is like something we can perceive. Being tall enough to make the Grand Canyon while sharpening your axe is, non-Euclidean, eldritch even. Now, there has been some discussion if Bunyan was ever based on a real person. There was a famous lumberjack originally from Quebec who worked later in Michigan, known as Fabien Joe Fournier, or probably Fournier. But there's no solid evidence there. It's just that there was a guy named Joe, pretty normal name, who was a pretty cool lumberjack who worked in Michigan and, may have been famous there. That's also, though, if you're talking about Fate or other such works, great, I'm the actual Paul Bunyan type character to tuck in there. And Bunyan is an enduring American symbol, basically to this day, used in all kinds of marketing. You've probably seen him as a mascot or logo somewhere. And is also just the subject of popular art, as you can tell by how many statues of Paul and Babe the Blue Ox you can find with a quick Google search. We just love to build statues of this guy. That definitely will be relevant later. Now, for our Fate lore, Super Bunyan's pretty interesting from a lore perspective. She is explicitly a powered-up form of our original Berserker Bunyan, who was a 1-star, and is a major character from the Learning with Manga, and previously appeared in the All Statesman event, available now in Main Interlude. So, in Learning with Manga, the original Bunyan was created by Guriko, the female protagonist, by mixing udon with grail mud and wishing to create a powerful servant, and that not going so well. Hence why she appears as a young girl originally, she's just kind of a grail goop, and then noodle dough, and then some other stuff. So this kind of explains how Bunyan can be a servant in the first place. Paul Bunyan would normally definitely be a phantom spirit. We've already established that his reality basis is very loose. So, we're journeying even on, original character vibes. Though, again, if anybody can actually find a source for that tiny quote, there's all kinds of lore building open-ended there. That said, this is also absolutely a joke about Fate's tendency to gender bend to balance out the gender ratios. It's a gag that happens frequently with FGO comments. That is arguably, how Okita and Nobu work as well. And then Super Bunyan arguably takes this parody up even further. She, ages up a little bit more into a more mature form, at least in her first 2 ascensions. Also, I feel like it kind of makes her fit a little bit more in FGO's normal art style, though obviously even in her 3rd ascension, it's still looking pretty good. She's now a limited SSR. I think I accidentally said one too many S's there, but I'm leaving that in. And she claims that she's switched to being an alter ego because the extra class is very strong right now. So, our usual kind of meta-ness you'd expect. Also, technically, Bunyan was a celebration of the anniversary when all the statesmen fired as well, so we got some fun stuff there. Additionally, Super Bunyan is also powered up by social media. She explicitly references likes and gains power by absorbing people's support on social media. This has enabled her to become the president or something. Remember that FGO is, 2 years in the past when it finally reaches us. Now, Bunyan is also an alter ego. Yes, there are some questions about this, because Super Bunyan is accompanied by the Learning with Manga writer and assassin, who were created in a similar way, and then that story. They appear from the 3rd Ascension onward for the most part. This presumably is to avoid some issues with some real-person fiction stuff here. Obviously, Paul Bunyan's name is explicitly stated because Paul Bunyan is a fictional character who's not actually owned by anybody. Fully public domain, some of those original story productions and stuff. Ryder and Assassin are not. It has been joked out loud several times that actually using their true names would invite trouble. I'm going to use the phrase like heavily implied or all but stated, so it's one of those open secret type situations. We can pretty much tell it is, but if they actually were to spell it out, it would be problematic. Anyway, Ryder is very heavily implied to be filmmaker and illusionist Georges Méliès, who died in 1938, so fairly recent on our run. He was most famous for the film A Trip to the Moon in 1902, which was basically pirated by Thomas Edison, hence why you'll see some strife there, but also did an early biopic of Jeanne d'Arc. The illusionist part is important because Méliès pioneered a lot of the special effects you see in film to this day. A lot of practical effect techniques got their start with his work, and basically continue to be used right up until CGI came around, and are probably still used in some places. I bet they're still taught in film school. Ryder appears as a bunny girl is probably a result of the moon rabbit mythology, or made, like a beautiful magician's assistant. Unsure. It's definitely more marketable. An assassin is strongly implied to be J. Edgar Hoover, who held the position of the first director of the revamped FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and directed the previous Bureau of Investigation, BOI. J. Edgar only died in like the 70s, so there's definitely probably some wiggle room in that not being acceptable to a wider American audience. Also, it's entirely possible that despite looking very feminine, Assassin is not a gender flip. There were very persistent and potentially corroborated stories of J. Edgar cross-dressing, and his sexuality was a subject of past and present debate. So, yeah. But yes, that does mean that because they're real people who are fairly modern and well-known, there may be some issues. Expect some jokes about trying to get in the game for real. Also, as mentioned previously, Bunyan herself is a major character from the webcomic Learning with Manga, which is in active translation into English, though it is obviously to keep up with where we are in the story ourselves. She continues to appear there. She was a big character in the All the Statesmen event, which you can access now, and obviously in our upcoming Mississippi Mythicizers. Now, there's a great name now, there. Mississippi Mythicizers. So, let's talk about mechanics. Super Bunyan is an alter ego who's on the higher HP, lower attack side, though not too far on either extreme. Bunyan is a quick arts buster, the classic gorilla deck, as you might expect, being a former berserker. Fairly average hit count, so high NP gain to compensate the deck there. Now, in a complete reverse course to normal, to fully explain Bunyan's mechanics, we have to go through her passives first. So, she has a pretty normal magic resistance, I am correct construction C. That's not really relevant to this. But the unique passive Power of Likes, exclamation point. Also, I really wish it was easier for me to live edit in the thumbs up like sound from Death Stranding every time I said it, but that would be way too annoying for me to actually do in the video and for you to hear, so just, mentally imagine it. Anyway, this passive gives Bunyan a stack of thumbs up, when attacking or being attacked for 3 turns. This immediately keys into her NP, which otherwise is a dirt simple single target buster, which deals bonus damage based on the number of stacks to a maximum of 10. It also reduces their defense based on overcharge. So then, her first active skill is a team-wide 20 to 30% attack up and 10 to 20% buster up for 3 turns. Pretty alright. Pretty solid, though it is a 6-turn cooldown. Second skill is a 20 to 30% battery for self and also a NP overcharge for 1/1 for the squad. 1 time, 1 turn. A little hard to use, but can be pretty spicy. Last skill is semi-defensive. Gives all enemies NP seal for 1 turn and has a 20 to 30% crit reduction for them for 3 turns. And also increases all allies star absorb on buster cards for 3 turns for quite a while. So honestly, Super Bunyan is a pretty straightforward unit. Using the Alter Ego class affinity to basically be able to do a wide variety of damage to bosses, this seems like it's her primary role. She is currently your only choice for Buster single target Alter Ego in the 5-star slot. There are some very good 4-stars in that class. Basically, the long and short of it is Bunyan gets stronger the longer the fight goes on, the more stacks you can get. So when dealing with enemies with break bars, you can maximize her NP damage while also buffing your allies for follow-up damage or for clearing adds. You get a boss who spawns with a couple adds. You can give your AoE attackers some big ups with her charisma type skill and that star absorb effect. while also giving Bunyan plenty of time to whittle away at guys and build up those likes. I think her debuff suite also further emphasizes grudge matches and grindfest with bosses. Your defenses are stuff like NP Seal and Crit Down, and obviously you've got a defense down that doesn't proc first on Overcharge, so that's all about that grind game. Buster Stall is kind of a weird zone, but, some people have been known to clutch out with the Leonidas before, so there's some room in there. Himiko also has very interesting Buster synergy, being a ruler for long-term endurance. This means that Bunyan can play your role both as your primary damage dealer and your offensive supporter, your off damage. So she's got a 30% battery on herself, which means you can probably utilize some version of our Buster reloading strats with Koyan and Oberon. Just keep slamming those NP shots over and over. But you could also pair her with AoE servants, besides just gassing up, Koyan and Oberon themselves to do that, though that is a route you can take. But in general, you can pair them with AoE attackers to clear early waves or pinch adds off the boss to make some more room, but also get in for the final boss while farming those likes, just like real life. In this regard, you're probably going to want Buster Servants of some sort, probably the Alter Egos or an appropriate cavalry class for your normal damage affinity, though like I said, you could consider something exotic like Himiko for a Buster Ruler. You could even throw in Martha in there. There's a couple of Buster Rulers you could try out, honestly. So keep that all in mind, but generally you're going to want Busters for her buffs and just general cards color synergy. Now for CEs for Bunyan, you're probably going to want to focus down on damage, which will mean attack ups, buster ups, and NP damage. A Black Grail Classic is useful, but there are several other combinations out there you can try. Feel free to mix and match. There's quite a few out there. I would say, based on the prevalence of the Buster Reload strat, and just in general the way you're going to do these kinds of things, starting NP charge is probably not your primary focus, though you can make that work. What you're going to want to do is probably engage with just more damage stackers and then let other people give you that source of juice. I do also want to go to bat for Bunyan's Bond CE. It can be useful. It gives her a fairly sizable NP damage buff, but also gives her a like stack for 5 turns upon killing an enemy, adding a new way to ramp that damage. And that's all pretty straightforward. Moving on to skills and stuff. As an alter ego, materials are, I guess I would say, hit and miss. On the one hand, Ascension only takes Rider and Assassin statues, no mats other than that. And most of your skill gems only use those types of gems, but it does also basically take twice the amount of gems as a result. Not as bad as some extra class servants who use 3 times gems or 4 times gems, but still, it is a little bit of a higher peak, so you gotta watch out for that. That said, once you get past gems, once they're out of the picture entirely, it's just some older generations of mats. Shouldn't be too much trouble to get out there, but you may have a steeper cost on some of those early level skills. Now, if you're looking to roll Super Bunyan, this may be your best crack at it, as her bananas will be now, during the Learning with Manga collab, during 8th Anniversary's big pile of banners, and then in a series of raid-ups called Past Collaboration Event Summon Campaign, which is going on JP right now. However, that's happening just before the super anticipated Mahoyo collab, which is right around the corner. So that may not be the best time for you to roll. Obviously, also, she's a limited SSR, so she'll be in every Lucky Bag campaign somewhere, but keep that one in mind. That said, that's our tall tale today. I hope you enjoyed it, and you are okay. And also, you should definitely like this video because it's thematically appropriate. Share on social media, even. You can also leave comments and join our channel memberships. Great way to support the channel, especially if you feel forced to use an ad blocker because YouTube is being gremlins. And you can also support us on Patreon, get access to this episode early. And I'll have more words for our patrons after a carefully constructed musical outro.
Put on women's clothing and hang around in bars. We put on women's clothing and hang around in bars.
And speaking of our patrons, before we go, I would like to give a special shout out to all of them, but especially Adam DeHart, Blacklist OG, Call Me Zed, Carlos, Dragon, Flays Icebird, Jeremy Vasquez, JDV9000, Just Lefay, Chris Starlight, Legendary Boss Hunter, Liam Kessler, Regent Raptor, Rise of Kenji, Rogue Robin, Sharvor, Sean Pryor, some guy named Bob, and Varian the Crow. If you like what we do and want to see us do more, consider supporting us on Patreon. Thanks for your support, everybody.